Flat 333 by Muzz. Chapter 1. The Recurring Nightmare. I awoke inside the same place every time the nightmare began. I was low to the ground, not my normal height, as if I were lying in something. I was pinned into something with a tightness across my chest. My limbs were free to move, but when I went to try to sit up, I couldn't. I was trapped, and then the noises began. At first it always began with things being banged and knocked over. Then a silence followed, so silent you could hear a pin drop. Then uncertain noises would begin. The moans and groans, the noises sounded forced and uncomfortable, as if someone was in a great deal of pain. I couldn't tell what the origin of the noises was, or how many origins there were, as the moans and groans were loud, quiet, short, long, deep, sharp, and created a cacophony of suffering. The noises would go on for what felt like hours, and all I could do was lie there and try to cover my ears. However, this almost seemed to make the noises louder. But the worst noise of all was the ear-piercing scream, which would only last for barely a second. The scream would go right through me and shake me from within, my sense of dread turning into despair. Eventually, the terrifying noises would come to an end, and I was left in complete silence again. But it was a brief reprieve, as something even more horrific was about to happen, and this time, to me. Footsteps began to march towards my location like two massive war drums. With every step the world shook, my fear and anxiety levels growing with every footstep, as I knew what was coming next. The door flew open and crashed against the already broken wall. Dust and bits of wall fell to the floor. As I watched the dust particles fall, my heart jumped out of its chest, and I froze with fear. I was now looking at the shadow of someone. Just in the periphery of my gaze, I could slowly see the head of the person start to peek from behind the door. My peripheral vision only allowed me to see the chin of the person. It was lumpy, misshapen, and the skin was blotchy, with patches of red, purple, and white skin. My eyes began to work up the face to the mouth, which was smiling at me. The mouth was awful. The teeth were all out of place, skewing off at various angles. Some of them were sharp, and others looked like clumps of chewed chewing gum. The colour of them was a disgusting rainbow. Some were the blackest of blacks, and others were piss-stained yellow. The lips were dry, with pieces of dry lip sticking up and away from the lip. There was blood dribbling out from one of the lips, with the flow of blood working its way onto the chin. The nose looked like it had been broken on multiple occasions and was crooked to the left. The nostrils were the worst part. One of them had green gunk pouring out of it, while the other was sealed over with a layer of dried blood. But the eyes were always the worst. They weren't distorted like the rest of the face. In fact, they looked like the most like a person. That was until you looked directly into the eyes. There was nothing behind them, as if the person didn't have a soul and they were just an empty husk. I can't even tell you what the rest of the face looked like, as the eyes would always mesmerise me into not being able to look at anything but them. The face would approach me, and it still had the atrocious grin unmoved on its face. As it got closer, I would try and thrash and get myself away from it, but the pressure in my chest would only get tighter and lock me in place. The face getting closer and closer, and with its gravelly, broken voice kept repeating the word, "Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy?" All I could do was let out an almighty scream, which brought me out of the nightmare. It was over, but I knew there would be another one soon, as it was always the same nightmare I had been having for years. It would always play out the same way. Apart from the faces faces would always change, a new hideous face for me to try and forget. I didn't know what any of it meant and wasn't sure why I kept having the same nightmare. I spoke to my best friend Luke about it, and he thought it could have something to do with me living near flat 333. Flat 333 was the top floor of the Alta block of flats in Blairbeth, a local area in Glasgow. Flat 333 could drain the colour out of any sunny day. It looked like all the other flats around it, but it had this negative aura to it that just even looking at it for a few seconds could ruin your entire day. Unlike the rest of where I lived, the Alta block of flats was very isolated from the rest of the houses and flats around them. It was as if the building had a stench and the rest of the building didn't want to be near it. The rumours about the flat were rife. In my area, some said it was a drug dealer's den, others thought that a group of cannibal squatters lived there and were waiting for someone to come to the door so they could snatch them inside and eat them alive. Hell, I even made up my own rumours about the flat. My favourite being the killer clowns that would kill you if you didn't make them laugh during a performance for them. I guess it was a coping mechanism to make it seem light-hearted and the nightmares feel less real, but the flat had a hold over me and the area. Nobody went near it and nobody dared knock on the door. I think the only person in my area brave enough to knock on the door was my dad. I was always awake, screaming after my nightmares, and my dad would still come in to comfort me. He would always have the same approach and softness in his voice, but I could tell there was some shame starting to creep in, that his 14-year-old son was still getting nightmares. I'd always awake from the screaming. My dad would have to rush in and comfort me. He would tell me he was there and everything would be fine, and in his arms everything was fine. I always felt so safe with my dad. He had been a rock for me throughout my life, but I did feel I was a burden to him sometimes. I was a very nervous and anxious person, and he was a single parent and had been ever since I was born. My dad had always spoken so lovingly and passionately about my mum. He told me how she had driven him wild in their early years. He was awestruck by her beautiful blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. He would say she was way out of his league and they almost didn't get together, but my dad said he was persistent and kept making grand gestures and eventually won her over. And they had their first date, and he says the rest is history. My dad would credit her with shaping him into the man he is today. He didn't talk about her death much. The few times he had, he would just say there was nothing more that could have been done. He would always say, with tears in his eyes, "Johnathan, I am so glad you are here. I almost lost you both." I would always try and push the flat out of my mind and hope that the flat would become another part of the local lore of the area I lived in, like Shark Rock and Crawford Lane. For many, it had just become an urban legend that people would tell each other to try and scare each other. But for me, it was something I lived with every week. Little did I know that the year I turned 15, I would have to face my fear, and it all started with a gift I received at my 15th birthday party.